now come to this whole issue of what are the impacts on climate change. Now, when you actually start putting in place the potential impacts of climate change, there are several areas to be looked at. One most critical area that we are already talking about today in the last decade or so is the impact of climate change on human health. Now, it's not about just human health, but it's also about a lot of interdependent ecosystems around human health again. So you can probably see that there are instances of the impacts coming through weather-related mortality, which means that there are extreme events taking place by way of extreme rainfall, or sometimes it could be a heat wave that is happening. It could be also a drought-like condition in certain parts, or it could be even excessive snowfall. Now, there are these unusual cases of people actually suffering because of excessive snowfall in extremely cold conditions. And therefore, there is a huge issue about how human health is actually getting affected. The second part is infectious diseases. Once again, I need not emphasize that what happened 4 years back in the form of COVID-19 is in some sense a little understanding of this. COVID-19 was not climate change, but the larger issue is that you can actually amplify COVID-19 today and think about it in the context of climate change, and you'll probably realize that the problems are similar today. COVID-19 happened because of a virus, and it spread very rapidly around the world. And today we are also talking about the same in the context of climate change when we look at how is climate change affecting the growth or the spread of certain viruses, pathogens and bacteria around us. Because of changing temperatures and rainfall patterns, you are seeing a lot of these pathogens emerging and going into places which never existed before. So you actually have all of these problems. Just to give you an example, not a virus issue, but let's look at this simple issue of malaria and chikungunya. Places in India or places in many parts of the world which never had instances of malaria and chikungunya are now having it, partly because it's a climate-related phenomenon. Cut down to Pune itself, you realize that chikungunya in this last monsoon, which has just got over, there have been huge instances. I don't think Pune ever faced these kind of issues in the past, but today it's being attributed to a very unusual rainfall pattern that's emerging, that's causing these pathogens to actually flourish and become a problem for human health as well. So yes, and more recently I was told that there were, I think, about 16 or 17 cases of Zika virus in Pune. Unheard of. Again, we do not know if there's a climate connection to this, but nevertheless, these are points that need to be understood, is that climate is perhaps responsible for some of these infectious diseases. And as we go ahead, we are planning to look at how do we address some of these problems from a climate perspective. I can't probably go and change the rainfall patterns because that is coming because of a lot of other reasons. But surely I think I can try and address this from an adaptation response in terms of the spread of these infectious diseases and what kind of resilience mechanisms I can create for my healthcare systems. So if I can have better healthcare systems in terms of, let's say, a surveillance mechanism, which tells me that, yes, I think maybe because of excess rainfall, let's be prepared for it. And let there be a system which tells me this. I probably would be better prepared. So we are in that phase where we're talking about huge implications of climate change and human health. And there's been a lot of work going on here in terms of trying to say that can we also look at what we call antimicrobial resistance. So many microbial or microbes are getting resistant to certain changes that are happening in our life. And so those are the issues that we need to address. The third one is the most important thing, which I think each one of you will always tell me, the biggest problem when I ask people about climate change, they say it's all air pollution. And so yes, Air quality related respiratory illnesses have increased over the last few years significantly. And it's rather unfortunate that I should be telling this, that we in India have severe issues of air pollution in many of our cities. As I told you at the beginning, it's not easy to quantify or pinpoint exactly as to where that air pollution and who's responsible for it. And you will probably realize that you also don't have an answer for it at that point of time. So yes, it is that's exactly where we are talking about how air quality respiratory illnesses are causing problems for human health today. And much of it has been attributed to climate related variability too. In terms of the temperature change, and it could be even related to the rainfall. So we often fall sick very quickly when there is a sudden change of climate, and most of us suffer from some routine respiratory illnesses. But I think going beyond the respiratory illnesses, it's also been now known to affect many other create many other imbalances in the human body as well. So this is one of the biggest impacts that I think we are facing today, and that's something that I need to address here from the impacts perspective. The second most important thing that I thought I should mention to you all is agriculture. Very significant for us to realize that today agriculture is the backbone of our economy today. That's the food. That is the food economy, food security economy that we are referring to in terms of how do we get our food for the day. Now, whether it's grains or pulses, or whether it's wheat or rice, or whether it is other specialty foods, all of them are dependent on that two simple parameters called temperature and precipitation, which I am showing here on the slide, which tells you that I need the right temperature, I need the right rainfall to ensure that my agriculture is grown, my crops grow in a certain way, and thereby it can feed millions of us. Sadly, that is not happening. And so while you and me may not realize it, the fact of the matter remains that yes, our crop yields are dropping today in many parts of the country. And so the yields that you're otherwise getting is not coming your way so easily. And so the price rise that you often see in terms of certain vegetables and products is partly responsible for this. Now, I don't know how many of you know the prices of the products that we all eat on a daily basis. The kind of foods that we eat at home, what is the price level of it? Now you start going back in time and doing a comparative study, you'll realize that those have had huge variations over time. And some of them are linked in many ways to the whole idea of the yields not being enough. So if you don't have the right yield, your prices are likely to go up and you're going to pay exorbitantly heavy for certain types of foods in the long run. So agriculture therefore has been very badly affected by climate change and continues to do so in many ways. It's also a factor which relates to irrigation demands. Now, this is where a third angle comes, which is the issue of water. Now, there is a separate point which I've mentioned here on water resources. But what is important to understand is agriculture is largely dependent on the supply of water. Now, this is where precipitation or rainfall becomes critical. You don't get adequate rainfall in your area, fine. We as human beings might have a problem, but more importantly, we don't have the water to grow our crops as well. So the demands of irrigation, which are growing by the day, may not be fulfilled if there is no adequate water supply available to us. So again, in a sense, Pune is, I would say, very blessed. When I say blessed, because Pune has access to almost 4 reservoirs with within 40 kilometer range. And most of the water that is supplied to Pune city comes from these 4 reservoirs, which has an adequate amount of water. There's a huge monsoon. We just come off a very fairly good monsoon this year. The reservoir fills up, Pune city gets its water, and I think life is good. But that's Pune. It's not about just Pune. There are places in the state itself which do not get adequate water at all. So there's a very different approach out there, and they're not able to grow crops. They're not able to grow produce those crops for the future, and thereby there are issues. So while Pune might be a different example, the problems of lack of water for agriculture because of a climate problem is quite severe in many places. So I think that is important for us to understand that, and I think I'll show you one or two slides about why certain crops are getting affected in different parts of the country. It's just a snapshot at some point of time. The third is this issue of forests now. Now you might ask me, what has forest got to do with it? After all, how is it connected to us? Now, it's also important to understand that while forests are important to have what is called a green cover to provide a lot of services to us as human beings and to various other plant and animal diversity, the geographic range of these forests are also shifting today because of inadequate precipitation, rainfall again. Again, it comes down to the fundamental aspects of rainfall and temperature. So lack of temperature or excess temperature or the fact that certain amount of rainfall has not happened makes a geographic shift in the way forests have grown over time. And that leads to poor productivity in forests, and which are supposed to be storehouses of nature services, so to say. So today, if you're talking about forests, it's not about just going there and having a nice time. It's also about the fact that forests are actually responsible for ensuring what is called a carbon sink. Again, it's a climate-related phenomenon, which is why today people are talking about growing more forests. For seeing is as what is called as rather I would say sequestering carbon in various parts of the country, so that your sink is important, and the more you have it, it's probably going to lead to better nature services around us, including rivers and other plants that are able to be made available to all of us. So yes, forests can actually become a huge resource in terms of the impacts of climate change. Then, as I told you, we are already talking about water as a resource. Now, I would say as human beings today, one of the most critical survival areas for us is the fact that we need fresh water. And I'm here talking about fresh water. I'm not talking about the seawater, because obviously seawater is not potable to us. And so that's not a concern in that sense. But what is important is fresh water. And that's the, as they say, elixir of life, because everything depends on the fact that do we have water for consumption. Now, here, the supply of water becomes critical in terms of one, quantity, and in terms of quality as well. So the quantity can become the most important part, obviously, because if you don't have adequate amount of water, you can't feed human beings, you can't have enough water for your crops, and of course, maybe for even industry as well. Today there is a lot of industry which needs water to create products. Just to give you an example, the textile industry. You take the textile industry or maybe the paper industry. We all wear nice clothes today. Where do you think it comes from? How is it the textile industry creates this? Because they need water supply to create these materials. Maybe a pure cotton, it may be a polyester mix or whatever be it, as we all probably are aware. But yet water becomes integral to that industry. And the lack of water today because of a climate problem is causing a huge issue as well. And more importantly, I would say it's a socio-economic issue now today, which means that last point which is mentioned on the slide is about competition for water. We are fighting for it. We fight for water as a resource. And again, as law school students, I would say in some sense, climate change is responsible for a huge socio-economic conflict between not only just local communities, but even between countries. And thereby, you might have read about it, but perhaps you might read in the future about how various treaties have been created around water, or water sharing. So these river sharing treaties that we all know of. So there is an Indus Water Treaty. There is the Kaveri River Treaty, which is there, which has been a vexed issue between southern states of Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and then there is a Krishna Water Treaty, and there are multiple issues around it, which means that it's all about how water as a resource is getting affected by lack of precipitation, in a sense caused by climate change. So the global warming today is creating imbalances not only in terms of supply or in terms of the quality of the water, but also in terms of a socio-economic conflict. So much so that there have been fights over it. We have been having running fights across nations, across states, across communities about this competition for water. And so that impact can become very, very severe in terms of how do we address some of these issues. That's the fourth major impact that I wanted to share with you. The fifth one is on coastal areas. Now, again, the coast of India is about 7,000 odd kilometers. But not just India, but if you look at the world itself, the marine ecosystems or our beaches or our seas or our coastal lands today have issues about sea level rise, which is what is shown is here in this slide as well. And so there are these problems about how coastal regions are getting affected primarily from sea level rise, and I'll try and show you a small case study related to it. And it also means that there is now additional cost to protect these coastal communities. So along the coast, typically there are fishing villages or people who are dependent on fish as a resource. And those are now a concern. One, because there is a sea level rise problem. And two, the other interesting thing that is coming out of it is a lot of fishermen's communities talk about lack of fish availability. And this is we did a study, research study on Maharashtra's coast 3 to 4 years back. And one of the things that came out from some of the fishermen communities on Maharashtra's Konkan coast was about lack of availability of fish. And they were saying that, yes, it's no longer what it used to be. And they themselves are talking about it in the context of saying that, yes, it is increasing temperature and that's causing us. That's a very, very community viewpoint that is coming out, but it's also backed by a lot of science that is coming. So this science community interface becomes very important to understand what's really happening to our climate in terms of impacts. So you can actually see the fact that the impacts of ecosystems or rather impacts of climate change on ecosystems can be affecting human health, agriculture, our forest productivity, the availability of water for us, and then of course coastal region, and of course last but not the least, species and natural areas. So the loss of species in our lives has also become a major concern. Again, there could be questions by people who will say, how does it matter to me if some species just disappears? Does it really matter? And there are politicians who also say, who cares? It doesn't really matter to my life. I'm not very bothered about it. I often hear these kind of responses when people say, well, I'm happy living in a city and enjoying the benefits of it. If some species gets lost, some part of this earth, it really doesn't bother me. Yeah. So, point well taken. But the issue is that all these species have some role to play in the well-being of people who live around that region. And therefore, in some way, they're actually contributing the well-being of those people. And that's where this whole concept of ecosystem knowledge comes in, or what is called traditional knowledge comes in terms of saying that, yes, every species or natural areas have actually got a role to play in the lives of plants, animals, and human beings as us. So we can't really obviously ignore it. Any loss is a loss, no question about it. And so, of course, there are other habitats that are going. So glaciers, for example, again, a lot of people often talk about glaciers disappearing and so on and so forth, which is very true. Very true in terms of why glaciers are so necessary for us. Goes back to the issue of water, is that glaciers are nothing but masses of pieces of ice and snow, which eventually melt and become water. So preserving glaciers is necessary so that there is a continuous flow of water availability for people, for agriculture, and for other requirements. And lack of glaciers obviously mean that much water is not going to be made available to you. So it's that entire patch of natural area which can actually go out of your lives, creating an imbalance for all of us. So you can actually see how climate in the context of temperature and precipitation can be a huge impact on a variety of resources and ecosystems around us.